I was holding the card when my hands started shaking. The same elegant handwriting I'd admired for 5 years, the same cream-colored envelope that arrived every April 14th without fail. But this year, I'd done something I probably shouldn't have. I'd traced the address on the back. And the name I found wasn't my husband's. Let me take you back to how this all started. My name is Claire, and I'm 42 years old. I married Daniel when I was 35, a second marriage for both of us. He was 43 then, charming, successful, with the kind of confidence that made you feel safe. He owned a consulting firm, traveled for work, and had that easy smile that could smooth over almost anything. Our life together was comfortable. We had a nice house in the suburbs, nothing extravagant, but it was ours. I worked part-time at a bookstore, which gave me the flexibility I wanted and the independence I needed. Daniel always said he loved that about me, that I wasn't the type to depend on anyone completely. Looking back, maybe I should have questioned why that mattered so much to him. The first birthday after we married, I woke up expecting something special. Daniel had been so attentive during our courtship, remembering small details, surprising me with thoughtful gestures. But that morning, he was already dressed for work when I came downstairs. He kissed my forehead, wished me a happy birthday, and said he'd make it up to me over the weekend because he had back-to-back meetings. I told myself it was fine. We were adults. Birthdays didn't need to be a big production. I poured myself coffee and watched him leave through the kitchen window, his briefcase in one hand, phone pressed to his ear with the other. Already absorbed in work, already somewhere else mentally. I spent the morning alone, tidying the house, folding laundry, doing all those small tasks that fill empty hours. Part of me kept glancing at my phone, waiting for a text, a reminder that he was thinking of me. But nothing came. Then, around noon, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there with the most beautiful arrangement I'd ever seen. White roses mixed with pale pink peonies, baby's breath scattered throughout, all arranged in a crystal vase that caught the light. The card was tucked inside a small cream envelope, and when I opened it, the message was simple but lovely. To the woman who deserves beauty every day, happy birthday. No signature, no name, just that one line in elegant, flowing handwriting. I called Daniel immediately, thanking him, telling him how gorgeous they were, how thoughtful he was. There was a pause on the other end, just a beat too long before he said, "I'm glad you love them." Not, "You're welcome." Not, "I wanted to surprise you." Just that he was glad I loved them. I noticed, but I didn't dwell on it. Marriage is about grace, about not picking apart every word, right? I set the flowers on our dining table where they caught the afternoon sun, and every time I walked past them that day, I felt a little less forgotten. The second year, the same thing happened. Daniel forgot until I mentioned it that morning, then acted distracted and apologetic. He had an important client presentation, he explained, and his mind had been elsewhere. He promised to take me somewhere special that weekend to make up for it. And again, at noon, the flowers arrived. Same style, same cream envelope, same handwriting. This time the card read, "Another year of strength and grace. Happy birthday." I showed Daniel the card that evening. He glanced at it, smiled, and said something about how the florist must keep records of previous orders. His tone was light, casual, but he changed the subject quickly, asking about dinner, telling me about his day. We never did go out that weekend. Something came up at work, an emergency that needed his attention. I told myself it didn't matter. We had plenty of time for special dinners and romantic gestures. By the third year, I'd started to feel a strange distance growing between us. Daniel traveled more frequently. His phone was always face down on the table. When it buzzed during dinner, he'd glance at it quickly, frown, and then turn it back over without explanation. He'd grown quieter about his past, brushing off questions about his first marriage with vague responses about incompatibility and different life goals. I'd ask about his ex-wife sometimes, just casually, wondering what had gone wrong in his first marriage. But Daniel would get this distant look in his eyes and say things like, "It was a long time ago, Claire. Some things are better left in the past." And every April 14th, like clockwork, the flowers arrived. Each card carried a different message, but all in the same handwriting. Wishing you joy today and always. May this year bring you the truth you deserve. Happy birthday to a woman of worth. That last one, on my 4th birthday with Daniel, made me pause. The truth I deserve? What an odd way to phrase a birthday wish. I stood in the kitchen, reading it over and over, trying to understand what it meant. But I placed the card with the others in my desk drawer and tried not to overthink it. Daniel barely acknowledged that birthday at all. He was on a business trip to Chicago, or maybe it was Boston. I couldn't keep track anymore. He called me at 7 in the morning before his meetings, wished me a happy birthday in that distracted voice I'd grown used to, and that was it. When I thanked him for the flowers later that evening, just said, "Of course," and hung up quickly, citing another meeting. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger. Not in a dramatic way, nothing I could point to and say, "This is wrong." Just a slow erosion of connection, like watching a shoreline disappear grain by grain. We still had dinner together when he was home. We still slept in the same bed. But the intimacy was gone, replaced by polite coexistence. My friends at the bookstore would ask about him, and I'd smile and say he was busy with work, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I felt invisible in my own marriage, that sometimes days would pass where we barely spoke, beyond logistics and schedules. I threw myself into other things. I took on more hours at the bookstore, started a book club, volunteered at the library on weekends. I built a life that didn't revolve around Daniel, because waiting for him to notice me was too painful. And then came my 5th birthday, the one that changed everything. The one where I finally stopped pretending I didn't see what was right in front of me. The morning of my 42nd birthday, I woke up alone. Daniel's side of the bed was already cold, the sheets pulled tight. He'd left early for the office without a word. No card on the nightstand, no note on the kitchen counter, not even a text message. Just silence. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle over me. 5 years of marriage, and I still woke up on my birthday feeling forgotten. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to call him, to hear him apologize, to have him promise he'd make it up to me. But a larger part of me was tired. Tired of excusing him. Tired of pretending his forgetfulness didn't hurt. Tired of being the understanding wife who never complained. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. My sister had texted me at midnight, a string of birthday emojis and heart symbols. My best friend from college had sent a voice message, but from Daniel, nothing at all. At noon, the doorbell rang. I already knew what it would be. The same delivery driver, a young man who probably wondered why he brought flowers to this house every April. The same beautiful arrangement, the same cream envelope. This time, white lilies mixed with lavender roses, delicate and stunning. I brought the vase inside and set it on the dining table. But instead of opening the card right away, I turned the envelope over in my hands. I'd never really examined it before. This year, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small return address printed in tiny letters along the back flap. My heart started beating faster. In 5 years, I'd never looked at the back of the envelope. Why would I? I'd assumed they were from Daniel, assumed he'd set up some kind of standing order with a florist. But now, holding it in my hands, I realized how strange that was. Why would a florist put a return address on a birthday card? I grabbed my phone and typed the address into the search bar. My fingers trembled slightly as I waited for the results to load. It was a residential address. 20 minutes from my house, in a quiet neighborhood I'd driven through before but never really noticed. The street name sounded vaguely familiar, like I'd seen it on a sign somewhere but never paid attention. I set the phone down and stared at the envelope. My mind was racing. If these flowers weren't from Daniel, then who had been sending them, and why? I opened the card with shaking hands. The message inside was longer than usual, written in that same elegant script I'd come to recognize over the years. Claire, it's time you knew the truth. If you're reading this, you've finally looked. I'm sorry it took so long. The flowers were never from Daniel. They were from me, his first wife. We need to talk. Come to the address on the envelope when you're ready. I'll be here. Margaret. The room tilted. I read the words again, then a third time, trying to make them mean something different. His first wife? Sending me birthday flowers? For 5 years? I sat down hard in the dining chair. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the card. Daniel had told me his first marriage ended badly, that they'd grown apart, that she'd moved away years ago to start fresh somewhere else. He never mentioned her name, never showed me photos, never spoke about her except in the vaguest terms. I'd asked him once, early in our relationship, if he was still in touch with her. He'd shaken his head and said they'd made a clean break, that it was healthier that way. I'd accepted that answer. Lots of people don't stay in contact with their exes. And now she was telling me she'd been sending me flowers, all this time, every single year. I looked at the address again, 20 minutes away. She hadn't moved at all. She'd been here, in the same city, the entire time Daniel and I had been married. He'd lied to me about that. What else had he lied about? The realization hit me like cold water. He'd lied. Not just about forgetting my birthday, though that was part of it. About everything. About her. About his past. About the flowers. And somehow she'd known. She'd known I needed those flowers, needed that small reminder that someone remembered me, someone thought I deserved beauty and recognition. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. I didn't think about it, didn't plan what I'd say, didn't even change out my jeans and old sweater. I just needed answers, and if his ex-wife was offering them, I was going to listen. The drive felt both too long and too short. My mind kept spinning, trying to piece together what this meant. Why would she send me flowers? Was she trying to cause trouble? Was she still in love with Daniel? Was this some kind of revenge? But the cards had never felt malicious. The messages were always kind, always supportive. A woman of worth, strength and grace. They felt like encouragement, not manipulation. And that signature, Margaret. I turned the name over in my mind. Daniel had never told me her name. In 5 years of marriage, he'd never once mentioned his ex-wife by name. The drive to her address felt surreal. I kept the card on the passenger seat, glancing at it every few minutes like it might disappear or change its message. What was I even doing? Showing up at a stranger's house because of a birthday card? But she wasn't really a stranger, was she? She'd been part of my life for 5 years, just silently, invisibly, watching from whatever distance she'd maintained. The neighborhood was older, tree-lined, the kind of place where people took pride in their gardens and knew their neighbors. I slowed down as I approached the address, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The house was modest, a small brick bungalow with a tidy front garden. Tulips lined the walkway, bright red and yellow against the green grass. The porch had 2 wicker chairs and a small table between them. Everything about it felt warm and lived in, nothing like the cold perfection Daniel always insisted on at our house. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel asking what I wanted for dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd forgotten my birthday, but remembered to ask about dinner. What if this was a mistake? What if she was unstable, angry, looking to cause trouble between Daniel and me? What if she was going to tell me things I couldn't unhear, things that would shatter whatever was left of my marriage? But something in those cards had never felt malicious. The messages were always kind, almost protective. And that last line, "I'm sorry it took so long," felt like an apology, not a threat. I walked up to the front door and knocked before I could change my mind. For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard footsteps inside, soft and deliberate. The woman who answered was around 50, with short silver hair and calm, intelligent eyes. She wore jeans and a simple navy sweater, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. When she saw me, her expression softened with something like relief, mixed with sadness. "Claire," she said quietly, "I'm Margaret. Thank you for coming." Her voice was gentle, not at all what I'd expected. There was no bitterness in it, no anger, just a quiet warmth that immediately disarmed me. She stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. "Please," she said, "I know this must be confusing. I'll explain everything." The house smelled like chamomile tea and old books. Everything was neat and uncluttered, comfortable in a way that felt lived in but not crowded. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and I noticed immediately that we had similar taste in literature. Virginia Woolf, Margaret Atwood, Toni Morrison. "You like books," I said, more statement than question. Margaret smiled. "I'm a librarian, or I was before I retired last year. Now I volunteer at the community library twice a week." She led me to the kitchen, a cozy space with white cabinets and a window over the sink that looked out onto a garden. She poured 2 cups of tea without asking if I wanted any, as if she'd been expecting me, preparing for this moment. We sat across from each other at a small wooden table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, needing something to hold on to, something solid and real. Finally, I said, "Why did you send me flowers?" Margaret wrapped her hands around her own mug and looked at me steadily. "Because I knew he wouldn't," she said simply. "And because I knew what it felt like to be forgotten." The words settled between us, heavy and true. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You were married to Daniel." "For 12 years, she confirmed. "And for most of them, I made the same excuses you're probably making now. He's busy. He's under stress. He doesn't mean to be distant. He'll be more present once this project is finished, once this deal goes through, once things settle down at work." My throat tightened. "How did you know?" "Because I asked around," Margaret said gently. "After the divorce, I kept loose tabs on him. Not obsessively, just enough to know he'd remarried. I wanted to make sure he was okay, honestly. Despite everything, I didn't wish him harm. I just wanted to be done with him." She took a sip of her tea. "When I found out your birthday was in April, the same month as mine, I thought about you. About whether he'd remember yours the way he never remembered mine. And when I saw you once at the farmer's market, you had this look on your face." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You looked the way I used to look, tired, invisible." I felt tears prick my eyes. He didn't remember. Not once in 5 years. "I know." Her voice was full of quiet compassion. "That's why I started sending the flowers. I thought if you had something beautiful on your birthday, maybe it would be easier. Maybe you wouldn't feel as invisible. Maybe you'd know that someone out there saw you, even if he didn't." The kindness of it broke something in me. I started crying, not dramatically, just silent tears running down my face. This woman who owed me nothing, who had every reason to resent me as her ex-husband's new wife, had been the one making sure I felt seen. She'd been taking care of me in the only way she could, from a distance, through anonymous flowers and encouraging cards. Margaret handed me a tissue box and waited until I'd composed myself. She didn't rush me, didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. She just waited, patient and present. When I could speak again, I said, "I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Margaret smiled sadly. "Because nobody did it for me," she said. "When my marriage to Daniel was falling apart, I was completely alone. I had no one to warn me, no one to tell me that what I was experiencing wasn't normal, wasn't okay. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was too late." I looked up at her, suddenly cold. "What do you mean, what he'd done?" She stood and walked to a drawer, pulling out a manila folder. She set it on the table between us, her movements careful and deliberate. "There's more you need to know, Claire. That's why I put the address on the card this year. It's not just about forgotten birthdays." My hands trembled as I reached for the folder. "What is this?" "Evidence," Margaret said simply. "Daniel has patterns. He did the same things with me that I suspect he's doing with you. The distance, the vague answers about money, the business trips that don't quite add up, the phone calls he takes in another room, the way he guards his laptop, the way he makes you feel like you're being paranoid when you ask questions. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were bank statements, photocopies of documents, printed emails. Where did you get these? Some are from our marriage. Some are from a friend who still works at his firm. Margaret sat back down, her expression serious but not unkind. Daniel's been moving money, Claire, just like he did before he left me. Shifting assets, setting up accounts I didn't know about, making sure that when he decided to walk away, he'd take everything he could. I stared at the papers, my vision blurring. There were account numbers I didn't recognize, transfers to offshore holdings, names of companies I'd never heard Daniel mention, dates and amounts all documented in neat columns. Why are you showing me this? Because I didn't have anyone to warn me, Margaret said simply, and by the time I realized what he'd done, it was too late. I lost almost everything in the divorce. The house we'd got together, my savings, even my share of the business equity I'd helped him build in the early years. He'd planned it all meticulously, and I'd been too trusting to see it coming. She looked at me with such sadness and compassion that I felt my heart break a little. I lost 12 years and most of my financial security. But you're only 5 years in, Claire. You still have time to protect yourself. I felt sick. The tea sat untouched in front of me, cooling. You think he's planning to leave me? I think he's preparing to, she corrected gently. Whether he's made the final decision yet, I don't know. But the patterns are there, the same patterns I saw in the last 2 years of our marriage, and I couldn't let it happen to you without at least trying to warn you. I flipped through the papers, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How do you know these are current? How do you know he's doing this now? My friend at the firm keeps an eye on things, Margaret explained. She was my friend first before she was his employee. She doesn't give me details she shouldn't, but she lets me know when there are red flags. And in the last 6 months, there have been a lot of red flags, Claire. I didn't want to believe her. Part of me wanted to stand up, walk out, go home, and pretend this conversation had never happened. Pretend that my marriage was fine, that Daniel loved me, that everything would work out if I just tried harder, complained less, asked for less. But the evidence was right there in front of me, and deep down, beneath all the denial and hope and fear, I'd already known something was wrong. I'd known for a long time. What do I do? Margaret's expression softened. You protect yourself. Quietly, carefully. You document everything, secure your own finances, and you don't let him know you're aware. And when you're ready, you make your own choice about what comes next. But you make it from a position of strength, not desperation. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're stronger than you think, Claire, and you're not alone anymore. I'm here. I know we just met, but I've been watching out for you for 5 years. I'm not going to stop now. I started crying again, harder this time. All the loneliness and disappointment and fear I'd been carrying poured out. And Margaret just sat there, holding my hand, letting me cry without judgment or discomfort. When I finally stopped, she handed me more tissues and made us fresh tea. There's something else you should know, she said gently. I looked up at her, exhausted. What? I think there might be someone else. Another woman. She said it carefully, watching my reaction. I could be wrong, but when Daniel was preparing to leave me, there was someone else. It's part of his pattern. He doesn't leave until he has something else lined up. The words hit me like a physical blow. How can you know that? I don't know for certain, but my friend mentioned he's been taking personal calls during work hours, leaving the office for long lunches. Small things, but they add up. I just wanted you to be prepared in case you find evidence of that, too. I left Margaret's house an hour later with the folder tucked under my arm and a list of steps written in her neat handwriting. My head was spinning, but underneath the fear and confusion, something else was growing, a quiet, steely resolve. This was my real-life story now, and I wasn't going to let it end the way Margaret's had. The next 2 weeks were some of the strangest of my life. I went through the motions at home, cooking dinner, asking Daniel about his day, pretending everything was normal. But underneath, I was watching, listening, taking note of every small inconsistency, every little lie. He mentioned a client meeting in Seattle, I checked the company website later. There was no office in Seattle. He said he'd deposited his quarterly bonus into our joint account. I checked the balance the next morning. Nothing had changed. Small lies, constant lies, the kind you only notice when you're looking for them, when you've stopped giving someone the benefit of the doubt. I followed Margaret's advice and started gathering documents: bank statements, tax returns, the deed to our house, his employment contracts, everything I could find. I made copies of everything and stored them at my sister's place. I opened my own savings account at a different bank and quietly started moving small amounts of my paycheck there each week. Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy with his own plans, whatever they were. He'd come home late, distracted, his mind clearly somewhere else. Sometimes he'd forget to eat the dinner I'd made, or he'd eat it mechanically while staring at his phone. I watched him and wondered how I'd ever thought this was normal, how I'd convinced myself that this was just what marriage looked like after a few years. The distance between us had grown so gradually that I hadn't noticed when we'd stopped being partners and started being roommates. Then, one evening 2 weeks after my conversation with Margaret, I found it. The real confirmation I'd been dreading. Daniel was in the shower, and his phone was charging on the kitchen counter. I'd never been the type to snoop, had always believed that privacy and trust were fundamental to a good marriage. But Margaret's words kept echoing in my mind. You have a right to protect yourself. You have a right to know the truth. I knew his passcode. He'd never bothered to hide it from me, probably because he'd never thought I'd actually look. 6 digits, our wedding anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I opened his messages and started scrolling. Work emails, texts from colleagues, nothing unusual. Then I found a thread with a name I didn't recognize, Sarah. The conversation went back months. I scrolled to the beginning, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. Can't wait to see you this weekend. That was from Daniel, sent 3 months ago. Her response, me too, this hotel is beautiful, you'll love it. I kept scrolling, reading message after message. The paperwork should be finalized soon. Once everything's settled, we can finally start our life together. I'm tired of hiding. I want everyone to know about us. There were photos, too. Daniel and a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, younger than me, smiling at the camera in restaurants and hotel rooms, places he'd told me he was traveling for work, cities he'd visited without me. I sat down hard on a kitchen stool, reading through the entire conversation. He was planning to leave. Margaret had been right about everything, and there was someone else, someone he'd been seeing for months while I'd been making his dinners and sleeping beside him every night, completely unaware. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. Quickly, I took photos of the messages, sent them to myself, and deleted the evidence that I'd done so. Then I put his phone back exactly where it had been, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I walked to the living room on shaking legs and sat down on the couch, trying to compose myself. My mind was racing. How long had this been going on? Who was she? Did she know about me? When Daniel came downstairs, hair damp from the shower, he smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "What do you want to do for dinner?" he asked casually, scrolling through his phone. I looked at him. Really looked at him, this man I'd trusted, this man I'd built a life with, and felt something inside me go cold and clear. "Whatever you want," I said evenly. "I'm not very hungry." He shrugged and ordered takeout from our usual place. We ate in front of the television, watching a show neither of us cared about. He didn't notice I barely touched my food. He didn't notice the way I was watching him, cataloging every expression, every gesture. He didn't notice much about me at all anymore. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, I lay awake in the dark and thought about everything. About Margaret and her 12 years of marriage, her losses, her loneliness. About the flowers she'd sent me every year, trying to make sure I didn't feel as alone as she had. About the life I'd been building with a man who was already planning his exit. And I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting myself financially anymore. It was about refusing to be erased, about standing up and saying, "I see what you're doing, and I won't let you pretend I don't matter." It was about choosing myself, finally, after years of choosing him, choosing us, choosing to believe in something that had never really existed. I texted Margaret the next morning from the bookstore. "Thank you. You were right about everything. I'm ready to do this properly." Her response came immediately. "I'm here if you need me. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone." Those last 3 words meant more to me than she could possibly know. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, supported, and ready to fight for myself. Over the next month, I became someone I barely recognized. Not loud, not dramatic, not falling apart, just focused. I had a goal now, and every action I took was deliberate and strategic. I contacted a lawyer Margaret recommended, a woman named Linda Chen who specialized in family law and asset protection. Margaret had called ahead, explaining the situation, so Linda was expecting me when I arrived at her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Linda was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and efficient, with the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She didn't waste time with small talk or sympathy. She just asked me to tell her everything. I spent 2 hours in her office, walking through my marriage, the distance between Daniel and me, the financial irregularities Margaret had uncovered, the messages I'd found on his phone. Linda took notes, asked clarifying questions, and nodded occasionally with a knowing expression. "I've seen this before," Linda said during our first meeting. "Men who think they're clever, moving money around, setting up contingencies. But they almost always get overconfident and leave a trail. They assume their wives won't look, won't question, won't fight back." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "The good news is that you're here now, before he's made his final move. That gives us time to protect you, to make sure you get what you're legally entitled to." She asked me to bring every document I had. I arrived at her office the following week with copies of 5 years of bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies, and the screenshots from Daniel's phone. Linda went through everything, methodically, making notes, highlighting certain entries, asking questions about specific transactions. "He's definitely planning an exit," she confirmed after reviewing everything, "and he's been siphoning money into accounts you don't have access to. This account here," she pointed to a statement, "was opened 8 months ago. Small transfers, nothing that would trigger your attention, but they add up to nearly $40,000. I stared at the number. $40,000? "And that's just what we can see so far," Linda said. "There may be more, but the good news is we can trace it. And we can protect your share. This is marital property, and he can't just hide it. What do I need to do?" Linda laid out a plan, step by step, writing everything down so I wouldn't forget. First, I needed to freeze any joint credit accounts to prevent Daniel from racking up debt in my name before filing for divorce. Second, I needed to secure my own funds, more aggressively than I'd been doing. Third, I needed to document everything. Every conversation, every expense, every time he traveled or stayed late at work. "And most importantly," Linda said, looking me directly in the eyes, "you don't confront him until we're ready. Let him think you're oblivious. The longer he feels safe, the more mistakes he'll make. I know that's hard. I know you want answers, want to scream at him. But strategy wins divorces, not emotion." I nodded, absorbing everything she was telling me. "How long will this take?" "A few weeks to gather everything we need. Then we file, and it becomes a matter of negotiation and court dates. But I want you to be prepared, Claire. This won't be easy. He's going to be angry when he realizes you've been planning this. Men like Daniel don't like losing control." The thought scared me, but it also steeled my resolve. "I understand." I followed Linda's instructions to the letter. Over the next 3 weeks, I became methodical in ways I'd never been before. I opened another savings account and transferred half of our joint savings into it, which Linda assured me was my legal right. I froze the credit cards we shared. I kept a detailed log of Daniel's whereabouts and activities, noting every late night at work, every weekend business trip, every time he took a phone call in another room. And I kept living with him, kept smiling at him across the dinner table, kept pretending I believed his lies. It was exhausting in a way I'd never experienced. Every morning I woke up and put on a mask of normalcy, playing the role of the unsuspecting wife. Some days I wanted to scream at him, to throw the evidence in his face and demand answers, to ask him how he could do this, how he could look me in the eye every day while planning to destroy everything we'd built. But I remembered what Linda said, what Margaret said. Stay calm, stay strategic. Don't let anger make you careless. Daniel seemed to notice nothing. He was too absorbed in his own world, his own plans. Sometimes I'd watch him at dinner, scrolling through his phone with a slight smile on his face, and wonder what he was reading. Messages from Sarah, probably. Plans for their future together. It hurt less than I expected. Maybe because I'd already been grieving this marriage for years without realizing it. The man sitting across from me wasn't someone I loved anymore. He was someone I'd loved once, a long time ago, before I understood who he really was. Margaret and I met for coffee once a week, always at a small cafe halfway between our houses. She became something I hadn't expected, a genuine friend. Not just a source of information or support in this process, but someone I enjoyed being around, someone who understood me. She shared her own story in pieces, filling in details she hadn't told me that first day. The ways Daniel had manipulated her, making her doubt her own perceptions. The red flags she'd missed or explained away. The moment she'd realized he was leaving, coming home to find half his things gone and a note on the kitchen counter. He didn't even have the courage to tell me to my face, she said one afternoon, stirring her coffee slowly. Just a note saying he needed space, that he'd be in touch through his lawyer. I thought we were working through a rough patch. I had no idea he'd already moved on completely. I'm so sorry, I said quietly. Margaret shook her head. Don't be. I mean, it was awful at the time, but I rebuilt my life. I'm happy now, happier than I was with him. I just wish someone had warned me. That's why I couldn't let it happen to you the same way. I'm so grateful, I told her. I don't know what I would have done without your flowers, without your warning. I might have ended up like you did, blindsided and unprepared. But you're not, Margaret said firmly. You're prepared. You're strong. And when this is over, you're going to be okay. Better than okay. Her confidence in me helped more than she knew. On the days when I wanted to give up, when staying in that house with Daniel felt impossible, I'd remember her words and push through. I also started talking to my sister more and to my best friend from college. I didn't tell them everything, not yet, but I started reconnecting with the people I'd lost touch with during my marriage, the people I'd neglected because Daniel always came first, because I was always trying to make him happy. My sister noticed the change in me. You seem different, she said one evening over dinner, more like yourself. I smiled. I'm figuring some things out. About Daniel? She asked carefully. She'd never liked him much, though she'd been too polite to say so directly. About everything, I said, and left it at that. 6 weeks after I'd first walked into Margaret's house, Linda called me at work. I stepped outside the bookstore to take the call, my heart pounding. We have everything we need, Linda said without preamble. When you're ready, we can file. I stood on the sidewalk, watching cars pass by, feeling the weight of the decision settle over me. This was it. Once I said yes, there was no going back. My marriage would officially be over. But the truth was, it had been over for a long time. I'd just been the only one who didn't know it. I thought about it for a long time, longer than Linda probably expected. Part of me wanted to wait, to gather even more evidence, to be absolutely certain. But another part of me knew I was just stalling out of fear. Fear of the unknown, of being alone, of starting over at 42. Then I thought about the flowers, about Margaret sending them every year, trying to make sure I didn't feel invisible, about the strength it must have taken for her to reach out to me, to risk me rejecting her warning, to care about a stranger because no one had cared about her. I looked at the calendar on my phone. My birthday was 2 weeks away. Somehow it felt fitting. This time, I'd give myself the gift Daniel never would. My freedom, my self-respect, my life back. "File the papers," I told Linda. "Let's do this." The morning Daniel received the divorce papers was a Tuesday in late April. I'd planned it carefully, made sure I wasn't home when the process server arrived. I'd arranged to stay late at the bookstore, organizing the inventory, taking on tasks that didn't need doing, just waiting for the call I knew would come. My phone sat on the counter beside me, screen up, volume high. Every time it buzzed, my heart jumped. A text from my sister, a notification from the bank, a spam call about my car's extended warranty. Then, at 4:30 in the afternoon, Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring, once, twice. Taking a breath, steadying myself, then I answered. "Claire, what the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, angry in a way I'd rarely heard. "I just got served divorce papers, at work, in front of my entire team." "I know," I said simply. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. There was a long pause on the other end. "You know? What do you mean you know? Why would you do this without talking to me?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. When would we have talked about it, Daniel? Between your business trips? During one of the birthdays you forgot? Or maybe during one of your long lunches with Sarah? Complete silence. I could hear his breathing shallow and quick. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more controlled. "Claire, I don't know what you think is happening here." "I know exactly what's happening," I interrupted. "I'm not interested in your explanations or your lies. I know about the accounts, Daniel. I know about the money you've been moving. I know about Sarah and your plans to start a life together once everything's settled." Another long pause. I could almost hear him recalculating, trying to figure out what I knew and how I knew it. "Have you been going through my phone?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "The point is, I know. And my lawyer has copies of all of it. Claire, just come home and we'll discuss this like adults. There's obviously been some misunderstanding. We can work this out." "I'm not coming home tonight," I said clearly. "I'm staying with my sister. And there's nothing to discuss. The papers are filed. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." "Fine." His voice had gone cold now. All pretense of concern dropped. "You want a divorce? You'll get one. But don't expect me to make it easy, and don't expect to keep everything. You haven't worked full-time in years. I've been supporting you." "Actually, I've been supporting myself just fine," I said, "and I kept records of every contribution I made to this marriage, financial and otherwise. But we can let the lawyers sort that out. I'm done having this conversation." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the counter. But underneath the nerves, underneath the fear and sadness, I felt something surprising. Relief. After months of pretending, I'd finally told the truth. My coworker Emily came out from the back room. She'd heard everything. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I will be," I said, and meant it. The next few weeks were tense in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. Daniel moved out of the house into an apartment across town. He took his clothes, his books, his laptop, but left everything else, as if he couldn't be bothered to care about the life we'd shared. We communicated only through our lawyers. Linda had warned me this would happen, that once the papers were served, direct communication would cease. But it was still strange, this sudden silence after 5 years of marriage, even a troubled one. Daniel tried to contest everything, the house, the savings, even my bookstore salary, claiming he'd supported me and deserved compensation for the years I'd worked part-time. His lawyer sent aggressive letters demanding I vacate the house, threatening to freeze my accounts, making wild claims about assets I'd supposedly hidden. But Linda was prepared for all of it. She'd seen these tactics before, she told me. They were designed to intimidate, to make me panic and settle for less than I deserved. She responded to each threat with calm professionalism, presenting the evidence methodically. The hidden accounts Daniel had opened, the transfers he'd made without my knowledge, the affair with Sarah that constituted marital fault in our state, the emails from his work colleague confirming the offshore holdings, the documented pattern of financial deception. One by one, his arguments fell apart. The judge assigned to our case was a woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen every trick in the book. She wasn't impressed by Daniel's claims that he deserved the house because he'd paid the mortgage. Linda pointed out that I'd paid for groceries, utilities, and home maintenance and had contributed to the down payment from my own savings. She wasn't impressed by his claim that I'd worked less, so I deserved less. Linda showed that I'd sacrificed career advancement to support his career, moving when his job required it, taking on the domestic labor that allowed him to work late and travel frequently. And she definitely wasn't impressed when Linda presented the evidence of the affair and the hidden accounts. "This is not how we conduct ourselves in a marriage," the judge said dryly during one of the hearings. "This is not good faith." The whole process took 3 months. 3 months of court dates and mediation sessions and angry emails from Daniel's lawyer. 3 months of living in limbo, not quite married, not quite divorced, existing in this strange in-between space. But through it all, Margaret was there. We met for coffee every week, and she listened to me vent about the latest development, the latest frustration. She reminded me to stay focused on the end goal, not to get caught up in the daily battles. She reminded me that I was strong enough to get through this. My sister let me stay with her for the first month, until it was safe to move back into the house after Daniel had cleared out his things. My friends from the bookstore and the library rallied around me, bringing me meals, checking in, making sure I knew I wasn't alone. And slowly, gradually, I started to feel like myself again. Not the version of myself I'd been with Daniel, always trying to be smaller, quieter, less demanding, but the version I'd been before him, confident and independent and whole. The judge's final ruling came down in early July. I kept the house, as it had been purchased with funds from both of us, and I'd invested significantly in its upkeep. I kept my share of the savings, including the amounts Daniel had tried to hide. The offshore accounts were divided equally, despite his protests. And Daniel was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees, since his financial deception had necessitated the extensive investigation. It wasn't a perfect outcome. I didn't get everything I might have deserved. But it was fair. And more importantly, I walked away with my dignity intact, with enough to start over, with the knowledge that I'd fought for myself. The day the divorce was finalized, I drove to Margaret's house afterward, still in the dress I'd worn to court. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and smiled. "It's over?" she asked. "It's over." She hugged me, and I let myself cry for a minute, not out of sadness, but out of sheer exhaustion and relief. When I pulled back, she was wiping her own eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking. "For the flowers, for the warning, for being brave enough to reach out when you didn't have to, for saving me from going through what you went through." Margaret shook her head, smiling through her tears. "You did the hard part, Claire. I just gave you information. You're the one who decided to act on it. You're the one who had the courage to leave, to fight, to choose yourself." We sat in her kitchen, the same place where this had all begun months ago, and drank tea. She told me more about her life after Daniel, the career she'd built as a librarian, the volunteer work she did now, the peace she'd found in solitude. I told her about my plans, tentative and forming, about how I wanted to go back to school, maybe get a degree in library science, travel to places I'd always wanted to see. "Do you think you'll ever trust anyone again?" I asked her. "Ever want to be in a relationship?" Margaret smiled, considering the question carefully. "I trust people," she said. "I just trust myself more now. That's the real gift of going through something like this. You learn that you're capable of more than you thought, that you can survive things you never imagined facing, that you're stronger than anyone, including yourself, gave you credit for." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. I was stronger. I had survived. And I would keep surviving, keep growing, keep choosing myself. It's been a year since the divorce was finalized. My birthday came and went this past April, and for the first time in 6 years, I didn't receive flowers at noon from an anonymous sender. Instead, I spent the day with Margaret. We went to a botanical garden an hour outside the city, walked through rows of tulips and roses and peonies, all the flowers she'd sent me over the years. We didn't talk much, just enjoyed the sunshine and the quiet companionship of two people who understood each other in ways words couldn't capture. Later, over lunch at a small cafe, she gave me a card. Inside, in that same elegant handwriting I'd come to recognize and cherish, she'd written, "Happy birthday, Claire. This year the beauty comes from you." I cried a little, the good kind of tears, the kind that come from gratitude instead of pain, from joy instead of loneliness. The kind that come when you realize how far you've traveled from where you used to be. People ask me sometimes if I regret the marriage. Honestly, I don't. I learned things I needed to learn. I learned that kindness can come from the most unexpected places, from people who owe you nothing but choose to care anyway. I learned that sisterhood isn't always about blood, or even about friendship in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's about shared experience and mutual understanding, about one woman reaching back to pull another woman forward. I learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel invisible. That protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That you can't love someone into being the person you need them to be. And that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from what's hurting you. Margaret and I still meet for coffee every week. She's teaching me how to garden now, helping me plant tulips in my front yard, the same bright red and yellow ones that lined her walkway the first day I visited her. We laugh more than we used to, finding joy in small things. We talk about books and travel and dreams for the future, about the lives we're building now that we're free. I did end up going back to school. I'm working on a degree in library science, taking classes online at night after my shifts at the bookstore. It's challenging, balancing work and school, but it's mine. This life I'm building, this future I'm creating, it's all mine, and that feels powerful in a way I never understood before. I've started traveling too, small trips to start with, a weekend in the mountains, a week at the beach, day trips to towns I've always wanted to explore. Margaret comes with me sometimes, and sometimes I go alone. Both feel good. Both feel like freedom. And every April, I think about those 5 birthdays, the flowers that arrived like clockwork, the cards with their mysterious, hopeful messages. They weren't just flowers. They were a lifeline thrown across the distance between two women who'd loved the same man and learned the same painful lessons. They were proof that someone saw me when I felt most invisible. They were the beginning of my salvation, though I didn't know it at the time. Margaret saved me from repeating her history, not because she had to, not because there was anything in it for her, but because she remembered how it felt to go through it alone. Because she had the courage to reach out to a stranger and say, "I see what's happening to you, and I won't let you suffer the way I did." That's the thing about real sisterhood, the kind that matters, the kind that changes lives. It's not about competition or judgment or keeping score. It's about reaching back and pulling someone else forward, even when no one did the same for you. It's about breaking the cycle of silence and shame and isolation that keeps women trapped in situations they don't have to stay in. So if you're reading this, if any part of this emotional story resonates with you, I want you to know something. You're not invisible. You deserve more than forgotten birthdays and half-truths and a partner who makes you feel small. And there are people out there, people you haven't even met yet, who will see your worth and remind you of it when you forget. Sometimes the most unexpected friendships become the most important ones. Sometimes the person who saves you is the last one you'd expect. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from what's hurting you and toward what will heal you. I'm still learning who I am outside of that marriage, still figuring out what I want, what I need, what brings me joy. But I'm doing it on my terms, surrounded by people who actually see me, who value me, who remind me that I'm worth more than I ever gave myself credit for. And every morning when I wake up in my house, the one I fought to keep, the one that's truly mine now. I'm grateful. Not for the pain, not for the lies, not for the years I spent feeling invisible, but for the moment I decided I'd had enough. For the moment I chose myself over comfort, truth over denial, freedom over familiarity. For the moment I realized that the flowers had been showing me the way all along, reminding me that I deserved beauty, grace, and truth. And for Margaret, for her courage and compassion and unwavering support, for teaching me what real kindness looks like, what true sisterhood means, for the flowers that taught me what love really is, not the possessive, controlling version Daniel offered, but the generous, selfless version that asks for nothing in return. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this family drama, from this real-life story that became mine, it's this. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't explain away red flags or make excuses for behavior that hurts you. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. But also know that you're not alone. There are women like Margaret everywhere, women who've survived and healed and are ready to help others do the same. Women who will send you flowers when you feel forgotten, who will warn you when you're in danger, who will stand beside you when you're ready to fight for yourself. You just have to be brave enough to accept their help. Brave enough to look at the truth even when it's painful. Brave enough to choose yourself even when it's scary. I did, and my life isn't perfect now, but it's mine, and that makes all the difference. If this real-life story touched you, or if you've experienced something similar in your own family drama, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Your story matters, your experience matters, and you're not alone. If you want more calm, reflective stories about finding strength in difficult times, about women supporting women, about choosing yourself when it matters most, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my journey, for being here. Remember, you're never as alone as you think you are. And sometimes the flowers that save you come from the most unexpected places.